these words I'll never forget, but he said, before you discharge a duty to your family or to people, you have a duty to me. He says, you remember this and don't forget it. Without me, you can do nothing. Powerful words, and it's so true.
How did you know that the Lord really wanted you in that circuit in the early 50s?
I really didn't. When I was in Bible college, my first year in Bible college was in Pennsylvania, and T.L. Osborne and Gordon Lindsay were conducting a tent crusade in Reading, Pennsylvania. And of course, we young men in the school, we heard about it, of what he was praying for the sick, and God was healing them. Now, my mama prayed for the sick.
Sure.
I mean, she had 12 kids, couldn't afford a doctor. I mean, you know, that was just normal, divine healing. She'd call that preacher, bring that oil bottle over here.
Yes, sir.
And anoint our heads, whether it was chicken pox or whether it was a cold or whether it was a broken toe or anything.
Preachers don't make house calls much anymore.
No, they don't make them now. But boy, I'll tell you, they did in those days, and Mama inbred that in us. But I never saw it in the scale that I saw it under that tent. We went to that tent meeting, and I saw T.L. Osborne, and I love to tell him this story. I saw him bring a man who was blind, and I knew the man. I mean, I was in school with him. He was a fighter, a Golden Gloves fighter that turned professional. And the manager that he had pushed him too fast. And he took a brutal beating around his eyes. And he became blinded in both of his eyes. And I saw him come forward in that tent meeting, and everybody in that city knew that this kid was blind. I mean, every sporting newspaper had the story. And here he comes in front. Now, I'm a student, a Bible student. I'm learning how to preach. And I see this young man of God, T.L. Osborne, put his hands on these blind eyes, and he commands these blind eyes to open. Now, as a student, if I was going to pray for a blind man, I'd take him behind the tent.
Yes.
You know, or in a back room somewhere.
And say, Lord, if it be thy will.
If it be thy will, healing.
Yes.
But T.L. Osborne brings him out in front of God and everybody, and skeptics, and asks God to open his blind eyes. And instantly, when he prayed, God opened those blind eyes.
Glory.
And can you imagine?
You were there.
Yeah, I was there.
You saw it.
And can you imagine the call of God on a young man's life? That God called us not only to preach the gospel, and I listened to him preach, I bought his books, I digested them, and I even tell him today, I preach your sermons better than you did.
Really?
But what a man of God. And to see him demonstrate the gospel. And if there's any young preachers out there listening, God not only calls us to preach the gospel, but he says to, the works that I do shall you do also.
Oh, yes.
And not only these works, but greater works shall you do, because I go to my Father. Demonstration. And Brother Osborne has a saying that I love. I copied it. And thank God he told me the word copyright. He has all his works copyrighted. He said that means you have a right to copy. Isn't that wonderful?
That's
I love
That's
it.
Beautiful.
And he says, if you cannot demonstrate the gospel, then you have no right to preach the gospel. That is powerful.
Strong statement.
It's strong.
But
every young person needs to hear that. And that's where we saw it demonstrated. Oral Roberts was a pioneer in that. When you see some of his old films, not tapes, but films, when he lays hands on the sick and when he talks to the devil in the name of Jesus, you see the deaf and the dumb begin to hear and speak, the blind eyes open, the crippled, the demon-possessed, the devils come out of them right on film.
Brother Schambach, a question that has bothered me for many years is, we will see a great revival as we did in the early, the mid-40s, early 50s, right after World War II.
40s and 50s.
And then we'll see kind of a tapering off, and then God will revive again, and then we'll see it not just in healing, but in other things. What's this roller coaster?
I don't believe it's
business?
God. I believe it's the body. We are the ones.
Yeah. Do we take it for granted then for
I
after
think
a
so.
while, and then neglect to pray, or I don't.
Well, let me tell you this. I spent 5 years with A.A. Allen. And when God separated me from him, it was a divine separation. He was moving me. I cried when Jack Coe died. Jack Coe was from Dallas.
Yes.
Brother Allen and I were in Hawaii when he died. I went down on Waikiki Beach that night and wept all night long. I didn't go to bed. I wept. I loved Jack Coe. And I asked God to let me take his place.
Really?
I did. I don't believe I ever said this on television. And I begged God. I said, one of your warriors has been shot down on the front lines. And I said, let me take his place. And just like you're hearing my voice, I heard God's voice. And he said this to me. He said, you're not ready yet.
Interesting.
Have you ever been rejected?
Yeah.
Like David? David wanted to build God a house. God said, oh no, I'm going to build you a house. God said, you are where I put you, and when you get ready, then I'll separate you. And when it came time for the separation, I didn't want to go. When you want to go, you're not ready normally. And when he prepares you, and then he sends you, then you're reluctant. Because Brother Allen took care of me financially. I had no burden. I mean, he had the burden. I was going along with the ride until you have to carry the load. And then I didn't want to go, but I did. And I'll never forget this, Paul. I went to the Coliseum in Chicago. And I rented that thing for a whole month. And I preached every day, twice a day for a month. And I've seen some great miracles. I took a truckload of canes and crutches and wheelchairs out of that meeting, people that have been healed and delivered. But it was in that meeting, and something in my life, I spend a lot of time, I love to pray for people. If there's 1,000 people that need prayer, I'll pray for them, all of them.
I know.
And you see me do that. I've done it and done it and done it. And sometimes I would get so tired when I go back to the hotel that I didn't have time to pray. I was so tired and so weak. And I'd just plop out on the bed. I said, I'll see you tomorrow, Lord. Like you all do. We're all made out of that same junk.
Yes, yes.
And I go back, and I think many times, now I'm speaking as an evangelist. Sometimes we go on momentum, and you preach, but it's always God working with the man. Sometimes the evangelist, I can't speak for the pastor or the teacher, but sometimes the evangelist gets to a point where he thinks he's doing it. And God left me get by with that for about 3 nights. And on that 3rd night, I was so tired. I never even took my clothes off. I was soaked and wet, lying on that bed. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, a bright light came into that room. And I heard the voice of God. I never heard it before, an audible voice. Haven't heard it since. It's a special time. And I heard God's voice, and he called me and said, son. And I sat up on the bed. Thank God he still called me son.
Yes.
You know, that's refreshing.
Yes.
Just to hear him say son. And he rebuked me. In a gentle rebuke, he said, you are spending too much time with the people, and not enough time with me. And willing to justify myself, I said, well, Lord, that's what you called me to do. He said, true. And these words I'll never forget. But he said, before you discharge a duty to your family or to people, you have a duty to me. And he says, you remember this and don't forget it. Without me, you can do nothing. Powerful words.
Yes.
And it's so true.
And you have not forgotten it, I see.
I never have forgotten it. But you know, I feel so gracious to God that he came to me at that early stage. Because there's a lot of men of God in those days that have fallen by the wayside. They've gone into business. They're not in the ministry any longer. But God came to me at an early stage and gave me that word. And every once in a while, my wife will say, remember what God told you. Yeah. Thank God for a wife.
Ooh.
The project. And without him, we can't do anything.